A little less than a decade ago, I stayed late at the office one night to work on a particularly difficult writing assignment. And as I stared at this aggressively blank page, I felt a wave of overwhelm hit me. And I'm not talking about your average everyday anxiety or some good old-fashioned writer's block. I'm talking about an all-consuming heaviness that settled into my bones. It felt like everything that I had been running from in my life started to close in on me at once. At the time, I was recently divorced. I was flat broke. I was sitting on top of $52,000 in student loan debt, which I had just incurred earning a master's degree in creative writing, which was a really interesting adventure because about halfway through my program, people started to ask me really good questions like, what exactly are you going to do with a master's degree in creative writing? And have you considered something more practical like business school? Well, I hadn't actually considered that, and I didn't exactly have a clear plan. I just knew that I loved to write, or at least I thought I did, until about the second semester of this program when I realized I actually kind of hated to write. But I stuck with the program. And in the process of doing that, I also started teaching. I started out as a teaching assistant, and then I became a student teacher where they gave me my very own classes to do by myself, totally unsupervised. And I felt in no way qualified to be doing that, but I loved it. I loved my students and watching them grow. I loved coming up with lesson plans. In many ways, I felt so much more creative as a teacher than I ever did as a writer. But time flew by, graduation came, and then things got very real very quickly. I don't know if you can relate to this, but I grew up hearing this really inspiring American dream stump speech where they said, if you just work really hard and get excellent grades and go to college, you can be anything that you want to be in life. And the thing about me was I needed to believe that because I grew up poor. Not like third world country poor, but like food stamps poor, like walking everywhere because we didn't have a car poor, like eating a whole lot of ramen noodles, not sure if we can keep the lights on poor. And so I did work hard. I mean, I actually technically got my first job at the age of 10 shoveling manure on a farm in Nebraska because my single mom couldn't afford to keep both my little sister and myself in daycare after school. And so shovel manure I did in exchange for horseback riding lessons. I was determined to work really hard. I was determined to get really good grades. And so on the day of my graduation, I marched across this platform adorned in sashes and ribbons and pins that said to the world I had done the work, I had earned the grades, I had stuck with the program. And yet weirdly on the other side of that platform, there was no agent from HarperCollins waiting for me with a book deal. On the day of my graduation, I actually lost my job technically because I was no longer a student teacher. And I was also informed that I now had that $52,000 in student loan debt. And so I did what I knew how to do. I hit the pavement. I went out and I worked hard looking for jobs. I applied for probably 20 or 30 jobs to receive not so much as a call back for an interview. This plan was not working out like I thought. This whole American dream thing was starting to feel like a bit of a sham. But then somebody did call me back. I was invited to come and interview for a financial data technology startup where they were hiring a financial writer. And the only words I understood in that sentence at the time were hiring and writer, so I thought, hey, how hard can it be? So I showed up and I schmoozed my way through the interview, cracking jokes about how unrealistic Shark Tank is. I mean, we all know that that's not really how venture capital works, right? Yeah, I didn't know anything about that, but I got the job. And a few months in, I had essentially proven two things. One, I was a very creative writer indeed, as evidenced by the cheeky little articles I was submitting about the hottest gossip in Silicon Valley, which my editor patiently explained to me was not exactly what we were trying to achieve with the financial newsletter. And so I wrote these what's in the news summaries where I literally just paraphrased what other legitimate financial writers were writing in the actual news. And I did my best to fly under the radar, but my assignments kept getting harder and harder, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the jig was up, before people would find out that I had no idea what I was talking about, and worse, no idea what I was doing in that job and in my life. I stayed up late at night sleeping on a mattress pad in my best friend's home office. That's where I was sleeping at the time, worrying that I would never get out of this vicious cycle of financial hardship that I was born into. And so that night that I stayed late at the office, I let myself break down. I sat there crying at my desk, feeling real good and sorry for myself. And then I hear this voice say, "Are you okay?" And I look up and I'm like, "God, is that you?" But no. Standing over me, looking down at me like the hot mess that I am in this moment, is my boss. And I was busted. So before I can stop myself, I blurt out, "No, I am not okay. I don't know anything about private equity. I don't even know what an investment bank is. And I'm basically going to be homeless soon, so why don't you just fire me now and get it over with?" And to my surprise, he laughed. Why would you laugh at somebody in their moment of vulnerability? I'm like, "Bro, can you not make this worse than it has to be?" And he looks at me and he says, "I'm sorry, I'm not trying to laugh at you. It's just kind of weirdly refreshing to hear somebody finally admit that they don't know what they're doing." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, look, I mean, this is a startup. We've never done this before. I've never done this before. Most people here are just figuring it out a day at a time." So I started to feel a little bit better, but I asked him, "Well, what are we going to do?" And he thought for a moment, and then he got this twinkle in his eye and this mischievous grin on his face. And he goes, "Hey, weren't you a teacher before you came here?" And I felt something inside me light up, but I started to tell him, "Well, yeah, but I don't really have a teaching credential and I can't afford to go back to school." And he goes, No, hear me out. What if I teach you what I know about finance and you use what you know about teaching and we start some kind of training program?" And I was like, "Is that a thing? Can I be a teacher at a company? I thought it was just classrooms and people being mad at you all the time, school administrators and parents." And he goes, "No, it's absolutely a thing. It's something I learned in business school." Maybe I should have gone to business school after all. But of course, I agreed to partner with him on this. I dove headfirst into this new adventure, this new career. And before I knew it, we had launched an employee onboarding program and sales training and manager and leadership development training. And I felt like I had really found my path after all of this struggle. So that was great. And, I could end this story here and wrap it up with a nice little bow and say something like, the key to unlocking a learning culture at your organization is admitting what you don't know. And you know what, that's true. I did learn that lesson. But the thing is, that was only the beginning of my story. After that, I have worked with many organizations since then, both in-house and as a consultant. And the thing that I've realized is that everywhere you go, organizations are different. They have their own culture, their own values, their own specific set of hardships, different kinds of leaders, and yet they're all kind of the same. Everywhere you go, you can see patterns of behavior that are very predictable, similarities, consistencies, archetypes among the people. And they're very easy to recognize if you know how to look for them, which I did because I went to writing school, baby. See, what has been affirmed for me in the years of my professional life is the power of something I learned about in writing school called the hero's journey. Now, for the uninitiated, here's a 30-second introduction to the kinds of things you learn about in writing school. Joseph Campbell was an American mythologist and scholar who studied religions and sacred texts and literature. And in doing this, he realized that the same basic storytelling architecture underpins all of the world's religions and sacred texts, every epic work of fiction, every canonizing tale ever told about the kinds of heroes we feel called to follow. Now, as a graduate student, I wondered how this could be. How is it possible that for thousands of years we've just been telling the same stories over and over and over? Or as Joseph Campbell would say, how is it possible that there is one hero with 1,000 different faces? See, what I've realized in working with many different leaders in many different organizations is that the hero's journey is not just a storytelling framework. It is essentially a blueprint of the things we know to be true about the human experience, namely that this whole being human thing is really hard. It is fraught with uncertainty. And if you have a bottom dollar to bet, honey, put it on the fact that the struggle is real, because each of us will have to endure a road of trials, a set of challenges and struggles that forge our character, that put us to the test. And on the other side of that road of trials is the hope of transformation. The idea that we might be imbued with superpowers that we earn along the way in the valleys of despair, when we have to dig deep within ourselves and ask what we're capable of becoming. What does this have to do with leadership? Well, I want to point out the fact that in that story I told you today, my character was the protagonist of the story, but the leader was my boss. The leader was a secondary character in what is essentially the prologue to my epic adventure. So let's talk about leadership lesson number 1, what a leader is not. A leader is not necessarily the star of the show. They're not necessarily the smartest person in the room, or the most experienced, or the one with the fanciest degree. They may not be the strongest or the toughest. They're definitely not going to be the most perfect. In fact, newsflash, the most extraordinary leader you ever get to meet will be a deeply flawed human being. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that everyone you meet, leader or not, is still in the midst of a very difficult and uncertain journey. Leadership lesson number 2, what a leader is. A leader is someone who is curious enough and courageous enough to admit that the ordinary world, as Joseph Campbell would call it, or as you and I might call it, the status quo, may very well be the enemy that we have to slay. A leader is someone who's brave enough to admit that the cultural norms and the institutions and the monuments that we've built over thousands of years can crumble in an instant. And what's more, it's probably better that they do, because things like progress, things like innovation, well, they require a whole lot of change. And if we get too attached to the way things have always been or the way they are today, if we're not willing to struggle into the next chapter, then we have no hope for transformation. Leadership lesson number 3, what a leader does. A leader is someone with the extraordinary skill of centering other people in the seat of their own power. A leader is someone who helps you see in yourself the potential that they see in you. A leader is someone with courage and curiosity that is contagious, because they can look at you and they can say, look, I'm willing to venture into this unknown, uncharted territory where there is no guarantee of success. But what I can guarantee is that if you come with me, I'm going to have your back and I will root for you every step of the way. A leader sometimes is just someone that shows up at the beginning of a story and invites you to cross the threshold into a brave new world. Leadership lesson number 4, a leader is you. What do I mean when I say this? Well, what I don't mean by this is that everyone is management material, or that anyone can or should try to climb their way or claw their way into the executive suite. Leadership has nothing to do with a job title. In fact, these job titles that we revere are part of a hierarchy-based power system of dominance and control and elitism. And frankly, these systems are becoming less and less relevant every day as organizations become flatter and flatter, whether we're comfortable with it or not. So when I say you are a leader, I'm not talking about a job title. I'm talking about the fact that each of us is imbued with a certain superpower called self-inquiry. Meaning that each of us at any point in time, any given day, can ask ourselves the very difficult question of, what kind of character am I trying to forge? And what do I want my story to be? And the minute you ask yourself that, the only thing left to do is to decide if you're courageous enough to heed the call of adventure. So in conclusion, screw business school. No, I'm kidding. Some of my best mentors have been people that had the good sense to go to business school, and bless them for it. But in all seriousness, if you ever find yourself alone at the office some night crying at your desk, or if you ever get to a point where you feel like your life choices are eating you alive, know this. Someone may or may not materialize out of the ether to ask if you're doing okay. I hope they do, but if they don't, whether or not there's a leader in your story, the hero of your story is you. So from one flawed character to another, I wish you strength and courage in your quest. Thank you.